Welcome back to Parenting for the Present. We are so grateful you're here with us today. And if you're a parent, educator, or caregiver who has ever wondered why some young people struggle to launch into adulthood, or how can we better support kids as they take those critical steps towards independence, today's episode is going to speak directly to you. We are honored to welcome Dr. McConville, a renowned clinical psychologist and author, and a true expert in adolescent development. His groundbreaking book, Failure to Launch, has given countless families clarity, compassion, and practical tools for guiding young adults through one of the most important transitions of their life. With more than 30 years of experience, he has helped us understand the emotional, developmental, and relational dynamics that shape the journey from childhood into adulthood. His wisdom is both deeply human and refreshingly actionable, something that we personally are absolutely very excited to bring to this community. So today we are diving into what keeps teens and young adults stuck, how parents can unintentionally get pulled into the rescue cycle, and what it actually looks like to support true competence, resilience, and autonomy. Dr. McConville, thank you so much for joining us today.
You are very welcome. I am honored to be here.
You've been working with adults, young adults, and families for decades now. What moment in your clinical work made you realize that you needed to write Failure to Launch?
It's that's an interesting question because I never set out to write a book. I have since graduate school kept a practice of keeping what we called then an integrative journal, and so I would write 3 or 4 times a week, trying to solve the puzzles and the mysteries of the kids and the families who were coming into my office, trying to teach myself, trying to integrate what I was reading, what I was hearing with the people who were sitting in front of me. And somewhere, I would say around the year late 90s, early aughts, I just noted an influx of kids who were sort of at least chronologically post-adolescent, most often college dropouts. I had built a local reputation as working with teenagers. And I think when people were trying to figure out who do we send this 22-year-old to, they sort of opted for the adolescent side of the menu. So as I began to see more and more of those kids and began to riddle and puzzle over how can I actually be helpful to them as a therapist, there was a point when I looked at my journals, which are copious, and I said, I think maybe I actually have the skeleton of a book here. And that's when I got serious, probably somewhere maybe around 2010, maybe a little before that. I'm a slow worker. Took me a while to put it together.
Well,
Could
I hear it's a daunting process to write, so that makes sense.
could you just briefly tell us in the audience who is Dr. Mark McConville? Like if you go on your website, which is markmcconvillephd.com, you've got a heck of a CV and publication list here. So can you tell us a little bit about who you are, your background, and what kind of how did you get to where you are and where are you going?
Yeah, well, like a lot of people, there were twists and turns and a few accidents along the way. Um, I um, I thought I was going to become a college professor, and I think it was an accident of fate that got was just it just didn't turn out. And I found myself at one point with a wife, 2 children, and a mortgage, and no job. And I was lucky enough to land a job at a large state-of-the-art community mental health center here in Cleveland, Ohio. And part of my duties had to do with interacting with the public, interfacing, doing public speaking. And while I've always had a knack for public speaking, earlier in my career, it pretty much terrified me. And so I was stuck in a job that gave me sort of periodic and predictable panic attacks. And then an opening occurred in the child adolescent department, and I jumped at it. And at the time, working with adolescents was not a preferred pathway in clinical psychology, nobody really wanted to work with adolescents because adolescents wanted nothing whatsoever to do with counseling. Talking about the 1970s. I mean, today it's a little bit cool to be in therapy, but in those days it was not in the least. And so I just developed a knack over time of engaging these kids, and I think treating them with a kind of respect. And I always would frame that even if my client was an angry 14-year-old boy, we were, in some sense, what I call existential equals. That I knew a lot of things about living that he didn't, but he knew things that I didn't. And I would just say over time, I think I developed a knack for it. When I've looked at it in perspective, to answer your question, how did I get here? I've sort of pondered and scratched my head about that. And I think the deeper motive is that I was trying to become the adult who was missing in my own youth, my own growing
Mm,
up years.
gotcha. So some of that kind of inner child work.
I wouldn't call it inner child. I was a mildly troubled adolescent,
Hmm.
and I developed a kind of, I mean, I wasn't a difficult kid to get along with, but I certainly had very little trust of the adult world. Everyone seemed to have an agenda. Um, I was a bright underachiever, um, had not fallen in love with learning, and I had trouble finding adults that I thought I could trust and that would get me, and who could help me to understand myself. So I think that was my motive, was to become that kind of person in the
Hmm.
lives of the young people who were walking through my door.
I love that. You said something, and what do you feel like is developmentally different about today's 18 to 25-year-olds compared to previous generations?
Yeah, we could do a symposium on that. There's some environmental things, but also some psychological things. The environmental thing is that um, the the economy has changed. We are no longer in the kind of manufacturing economy where you could be a young person and easily get a good paying job. When I graduated from high school at age 17, I could have taken a bus across town to Kodak, gotten a job, joined a union, rented an apartment, and put a down payment on a car within 6 months. Today, that simply isn't possible. We're in a service economy that requires much more in the way of education. And so it's a longer road to hoe for today's kids. But the other thing that's really changed is parenting.
Mm.
Uh, we evolved from spare the rod, spoil the child to Rudolf Dreikers and uh, logical consequences for children to Thomas Gordon with parent education and learning how to listen so that your kids will talk to you. So over time, parents became much more relational in their parenting, much more interested in the inner world of the child, right? Very, very different. And I would say there have been some very interesting outcomes of that. I think today's generation of young people are far more supported than previous generations. And there's a lot of upside to that. Parents get slammed a lot, snowplow parents, helicopter parents. But I think of take a kid take a 14-year-old ADHD boy. In my era, that kid's chance of ending up in college was pretty close to zero. He didn't like school. He didn't do well in school. He was a pain in the neck in school. Today, he may be in a 504 program. He may have special help or tutors. He will have adults that understand him. He's got a fighting chance to end up with a post-secondary education, right? We could say the same about sports. I mean, today kids are I have a granddaughter who, by the way, was just named All Ohio in girls soccer, but she's had
Wow.
tremendous support from her parents, from coaches, from leagues that didn't exist when I was growing up. So that's the upside, right? That parenting is much more attentive to the needs of kids. The downside is that we have some kids that sort of absorb that support and don't really use it to launch. They live, as I like to put it, in mom and dad's country club, really not doing the work of preparing for the next stage of life.
That's interesting, Mark. I like that concept because we certainly see it a lot in where we live. And so families end up having to do what are really drastic things. They end up sending these students to wilderness or then to therapeutic boarding schools. And it creates kind of a lot of internal discomfort for me. Is that really, or those are our two choices, either supporting parents to kind of set limits and provide boundaries, which it's a little bit too late to do it at that point, or sending, children away. So if you're speaking to those families who are doing that, what are typical recommendations you have trying to put that genie back in the bottle?
Are we talking about adolescents or talking about older kids?
I'm talking about adolescents, let's say 14 to 17-year-old kids. Kids that are, entitled, you see entitlement, you may see kids that just parents who have a little bit harder time setting boundaries and giving those kids the guardrails they need.
Yeah. Well, there's a huge range from oppositional defiant disorder,
Mhm.
where I don't know, I'm kind of inclined to get out my old rosary beads, because what the options are limited, right? Things like wilderness training. It's hard to pull that kid into a collaborative relationship, or even in family counseling. It's hard to get that kid invested. But there are a lot of kids that are sort of poking the edges of the boundaries, making some bad decisions, but they're not lost causes. They're going to school, they're doing some of their schoolwork, enough of their schoolwork. And I think those parents can be coached on how to sort of tailor their parenting approaches to the level of the kid. I
Hmm.
have a model that I refer to as the natural history of parenting. And everyone talks about child development, but the way that parents parent, if we just look at effective and successful families, they evolve through stages of what their parenting looks like. And I often find myself intervening to help parents who are stuck, to move into the next stage. So, for example, they may have a 14-year-old, and all they're doing is kind of laying down rules and dishing out punishments. And I try to move them into learning how to negotiate with a 14-year-old, how to set up some quid pro quo, how to teach the kid that if you give something, you get something. If you look at the difference between 14-year-olds and 18-year-olds, 18-year-olds have mostly learned that if I play enough by the rules, you, the parent, will stay off my back, stay out of my social life. And so I've learned that there is this inextricable link between freedom and responsibility. And so much of parenting is trying to teach that link. And I think parents can be coached. Now, granted that there are some kids that seem to be beyond that, and they do need environments and professionals that are tailored to their specific needs.
How can parents tell the difference between normal late blooming and true developmental stuckness?
Well, the truth of the matter is that often they cannot, that they often look very much alike. But when I think of, well, there are in many cases some differences. And one of the differences is that in late blooming, you are seeing progress. Just the parent isn't seeing it at the rate they would like to see it, right? I
Mm.
sometimes ask parents to envision that their child is like a line on a graph, and to envision what's the slope of that line. Is it tilting upward? So if you've got a kid between 18 and 25 who takes 7 years to complete college, that may not be what the parents preferred. That may cost them a few extra tuition dollars, but it is progress, right? The idea, I often will say to parents, stop thinking about where he is next year. Think of what kind of 30-year-old is taking shape. And so if you are seeing some growth in maturity and self-management, self-regulation, then late blooming to me is just not a problem at all. Real stall is when that line on the graph is either flat or it's descending. There nothing they are doing that looks like it is helping to prepare the foundation for what will become over time an adult life.
We hear a lot in our practice when we're sitting down with parents and we're discussing goals for their kids. And almost every single time, a parent will say, my kid is not motivated. How can we motivate them? And can you talk a little bit about that in this context?
Sure. I mean, motivation is it's such an interesting phenomenon. We act like we all know what it is, but really, what is it? There are different varieties. And I
A
think
buzzword.
positive motivation involves, well, why would I be motivated to do something? Number one, I'm interested in it. I find it interesting. Maybe I'm even fortunate enough that it deserves the label of being called a passion, or maybe it's very utilitarian. I was very motivated, Matthew. You'll remember this, that when I had to take my state licensing psych exam, I was very motivated to do well on it. Well, certainly not because it particularly interested me, and it certainly was not a passion, but it was useful.
Yeah.
It would get me to where I wanted to get. So that was a kind of motivation. But the motivation that if we're talking about teenagers, um, it's very common to find motives that we have difficulty linking up with the adult world. It may be motivation to be good at a sport, motivation to be good at a video game, motivation to be good at dating, or goofing off, or that sort of thing. Which by the way, I would argue those are skills that can be useful in the adult world, but it's often hard to see them. But the kind of motivation that's often missing is necessity, right? And necessity, I would argue, that's what gets my quarterly income tax payments in on time or close to on time, right? And it's what makes the world go round. And so the art of parenting for kids who are really they're not exhibiting their own initiated positive constructive motivation is, how do I create necessity for them? And it may be as sort of classic parenting with a teenager as you don't get driving privileges until you catch up on your science project, or you don't get your Xbox until you bring your grades up. I mean, that's old style parenting that is, more often than not, it is effective. It may not teach your kid love of learning, but it'll teach them the mechanics of getting a homework assignment in. With older kids, with say a 22 or 23-year-old, it might be something like, look, now that you're 23, it's time for you to have your own phone plan. It's just appropriate at your age. This is not parenting. We're just saying this is what adulthood looks like. So I had parents who told me the story of having done this. They gave me the idea, actually, and their kid said to them, "Well, how am I going to pay for that?" And they brilliantly answered, "We don't really know."
Return that responsibility.
Right. Moving the problem from their lap into his lap and creating necessity for what is perceived necessity for him. So motivation's tricky that way, and often it is creating it in that more pedestrian domain of necessity.
I think
Is
that's
that
really
a,
helpful for our listeners to kind of, frame things that way, in that way, Mark, is, basically how important is it to you? And then is that kind of raise your stress level, attention level, however you think about it, whether you think about your frontal lobe or your, kidneys, does it motivate you enough to kind of get moving? So I think that's a nice concept, is how do we create necessity for our children? And when we overindulge or we solve their problems too much for them, it doesn't become, there's not necessity.
Exactly.
It's
And there's a
great.
difference between necessity. I make a real distinction between parenting. In parenting, if you're my kid, I'm trying to shape you up so that you
Yeah.
can acquire some skill that will be useful to you. And that works through most of adolescence, but you try to pull that off with a 20-something, and they resent on just on principle that you're still trying to shape them up.
Yeah.
So, um, for example, saying, we're not going to pay for your phone until you get a job, that's parenting. And what you've just done is invited a power struggle. But saying something along the lines of, look, now that you're 23, 24, whatever, it's time for you to have your own phone plan. And whether you get a job or not is your business, but the phone plan is yours. I'm not trying to parent you. I'm just telling you the ground rules of our relationship have changed now that you're at this age. That's necessity.
You
Right.
describe a parent shift from manager to consultant. Is this an example of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's my model, the natural history of parenting, that we evolve. I mean, there are probably 100 ways we influence children, but the three that jump out at me as the most obvious are supervision, in which I, the parent, I have or should have the power, right? You're 7 years old and it's time for you to turn the TV off and get up to take your bath and go to bed. It's my job to make that happen, right? So that's one way I influence child behavior. Another is negotiation, which is I begin to share the power. Look, if you can catch up on your homework by the end of the week and your grade book shows that your assignments are in, then you have full social privileges for the weekend. There's a quid pro quo. There's something to give, something to get. We're sharing the power, and I, the parent, decide when it's appropriate to do that and when it's not. You tell me you want to go to a concert. I'm a little bit dubious about it, but we work out a quid pro quo. We trade horses. You agree that you'll call me on the way. You'll call me when you get there. You make a commitment not to use drugs or to use alcohol. That you'll wake me up when you get home. So I've extracted concessions from you, but you extracted a concession from me. You're going to the concert. And then the final stage is, or the final type is consultation, where I have lots of knowledge and wisdom. I have a lot to offer, but you hold the power. I'm here at your bidding. Let me know if I can help you with that. You're going for a job interview. Hey, I've done a lot of job interviews. Let me know if I can be of help to you. But you own the initiative and you get to decide whether or not I get involved in the process. Now we do consultation with, we do it with 5-year-olds. We say, is that really the coat you want to wear outside? Are you sure that's warm enough? And the 5-year-old says, I want to wear this coat. And you say, okay, you can wear that coat. But it's the supervisor who's deciding that consultation is appropriate in that particular moment, right? But when you get to kids past 18, you better learn to become a consultant because they're just not. You may do a little bit of negotiation, right? But the fact of the matter is, like it or not, the power is leaving your side of the field and going to their side.
What are some of those reasons you see where young adults are failing to launch?
Oh,
Basically, how do I prevent this from being my son?
yeah. If I had to think of what are when I see the things that really get in the way, one is, and this is almost epidemic, the underdevelopment of executive function.
Yeah.
ADHD, just to take that as a classic example of underdeveloped executive function. In the DSM-5, I think they say the incidence in the general population, it's some fairly small number, maybe 7%, maybe 11%, I don't, something in there. But when I look at my sample of families that I've consulted with, which is, somewhere between 400 and 500, I would say the incidence is more like 75 or 80%, where that is, they have not developed the ability to organize, to plan, to self-discipline, to set aside wants in favor of things that need to get done, to be strategic, just haven't developed those capabilities. And often the reason they haven't, now this is my population, I would say, tend to be kids from better established families, but often it's because these kids are so bright that they manage to get through school without having to develop those kinds of organizational executive function skills. The second thing I would say is it's something that I might loosely call it promotion anxiety. So here I am, I'm 18, I'm going off to college, I'm in a transition. I kind of had my whole identity figured out as a 12th grader, which most 12th graders do. But now I'm entering a new world, a new field. I'm not quite sure what my status is. I'm not sure if I'll be the same person or as successful. Some people handle transitions gracefully, but an awful lot of people, it's pretty common, handle transitions with anxiety, promotion anxiety, whether it's moving on to college, whether it's moving from college into the adult work world, or whether it's literally a promotion at my place of work. It's that I'm new and I'm untried, and while you may think I'm up to the task, I'm not so sure. And that kind of anxiety can lead to avoidance. One way for me to solve my overwhelming anxiety about entering the adult world is to not develop any interest in entering the adult world, right? Avoidance inevitably and perfectly solves the anxiety problem. I think if I had to put my finger on a third, I'm going to loosely call it cause, it would be parent enabling. And I think it's important to say that no parent sets out to enable, at least no parent I've met. They set out to be supportive. Let me help you out. You messed up. I'm going to step in and give you some support, maybe bail you out of whatever mess you got yourself into. And I do that because I want that to be encouraging and motivating for you to kind of learn from your mistake and to get on with things. But what if you make the same mistake over and over again? Or when I say, yeah, you're welcome to live here while you look for a job, and here we are 18 months later, and you haven't done a great deal of job looking, and I'm not the kind of parent that can just kick my kid out of the house. Now, all of a sudden, I become the enabler, even though what I set out to do was to be supportive and to give you kind of a place from which to begin your life. So those are the three things I'd put my finger on.
What are some of those common ways that a parent accidentally enables stuckness?
Well, usually by trying to help too much, right? I mean, that's the most common way. It's I thank God that I did not have a failure to launch kid, because it's the tender-hearted parents, and I'm guilty. They're the ones that have trouble setting that limit and drawing the line and saying, I'm willing to support you, but only under certain conditions. You have to be doing something constructive. You have to, in the process of building a life, which takes, build an adult life takes 10 or 15 years, you at least have to begin laying some bricks right now. And if you're engaged in that process, I will help you. But if you won't engage in that process, you're welcome for dinner, but I'm not paying your rent. That sort of thing. It's drawing that line. And I think a lot of parents have difficulty drawing that line and creating. What often gets these kids moving is when parents create a crisis of just the right dimension. A crisis that's not overwhelming, but also it's not trivial. And the kid resolves the crisis by going back to school, getting more hours at work, something of that sort.
But Mark, as you're talking, it's just such a fear-driven process. And so, I think that if you think about the job of a parent is to take care of a child, and then you have this grown person living in your home, and then, well, I can't kick them out on the street. I mean, dealing with that fear, as you're saying, it's a really hard process. I mean, some of the more challenging cases that I've had have been this age range of 18 to 25, and we've tested and we've got the IQ scores, we've got the academic scores, and the parents are saying, well, they're really bright, but it is the executive function skills that are deficient, combined with kind of the parents' fears and worries of how do I kick them out of my house, or how do I get them motivated? I think it's a really intrinsic problem for a lot of families.
Yeah, you've really described it so well. And I think one of the things is that parents tend to think in binary terms. Either we continue with the status quo, which is he's living on the third floor, he's playing video games until 4 in the morning. I can smell that he's smoking weed, right? Either we continue with that or I kick him out of the house. And what they don't see is there are a lot of gradations. There's a lot of gray area in between. How about, now that you're 24, you should be contributing to the family Wi-Fi because we pay $140 a month for that, and you use it probably 80% of the time. So here's your monthly bill. I'm just, look, this is what you would do if you were renting from a landlord. Um, there are ways that I can, without kicking you out of the house, that I can stop being the enabler and I can withdraw services that I consider to be luxuries while you may consider them to be necessities. The other thing is that kicking a kid out of the house is very different from, I'll give you an example. When my son was in law school, it was between his second and third year. And he was never a problem of any sort, but he and his mother could get on each other's nerves a little bit. It wasn't anything to make us a stink about. But I remember saying to him once, I looked at him and I said, "Would you like to have your own apartment?" And his eyes got as big as saucers. And he said, "Is that possible?" And I said, "Frankly, I have no idea. But why don't we go find out?" So we went down to an area near Case Western Reserve University called Little Italy. We poked around. We found, in fact, that there was something very affordable, and we moved him out. And that following spring, he and his mother were again renewing their tradition of going to Cleveland Indians baseball games together because they're both baseball fanatics, right? So there are in many situations kids can be moved under a separate roof, providing that it's affordable, providing that the kid is capable of life skills, that
Mhm.
he's able to go grocery shopping. But that can be done with a great deal of loving kindness. I say to parents, the first thing you do after the lease is signed is you make a field trip to IKEA and you buy lots of cool furniture and you buy him a 40-inch television set, right? Now he thinks it's Christmas morning, but the fact is, 2 months later, a bill is going to arrive in the mail for the Wi-Fi, right? And the rent is going to come due, and all those responsibilities of his apprenticeship to adult living begin to knock on his door. And you, the parent, can really titrate exactly how much financial support do we supply and how much do we leave in his column. So I'm just saying they're way short of kicking somebody out. There are a lot of ways that you can approach that same principle.
I
I
love
hope
that idea of that. I mean, it's essentially kind of collaborative problem solving, right? And then one
exactly.
thing, that we're very try to be proactive in our thinking, at least in the swimming upstream and seeing how we can get ahead of things. And one subtle difference is, you talked about, hey, the Wi-Fi bill cost X, your phone bill is this, etc. We've talked a lot before about switching from the idea of chores at an early age to contributions in the family. Like, so,
Absolutely.
I mean, we all need to, we all live here, we all need to pull together. And to your point, if you're still at home at a certain age, you're gonna have to contribute in a greater way. I just wanted to back up to the launching successfully piece. I like how you broke that into the three buckets of executive function skills being underdeveloped, this idea of promotion anxiety. I think that is kind of a new concept for me that I like. And then maybe a root cause in terms of parent enabling. How does that work in with this idea of, okay, so if we're going to say that in general, boys, we tend to be a little bit later on our executive function skills development, our prefrontal cortex, etc. This idea that, hey, maybe a lot of 18-year-old youth, both boys and girls, aren't quite ready for the responsibility of walking out the door and living on their own. How do you balance that with, okay, so proactively we can work on some executive function skills in high school, I, as a parent, can work on my well-intentioned enabling, and then this promotion anxiety piece. So where is a gap year or years beneficial where you're going to work on kind of a lot of the different areas that need to be developed so that you're more ready for college versus are you just enabling the or kind of the where am I going with this? The promotion anxiety? Are you just feeding into that?
Really, yeah.
No, did you were mentioning gap years? Was that your
Yeah, so I think
question?
there's this idea that okay, a lot of 18-year-olds are not ready to they go to college, they can't manage their lives, they don't really own their life for lack of a better word. And so the solution is let's take a gap year or two and let's get you some life skills and maybe this idea of even national service and AmeriCorps or whatever it is. So I think those are good ideas, but how does a parent kind of balance that with Matthew and Eve? What am I getting at here with the promotion anxiety? Oh, you're scared to go to college, so let's take a little more time and let you figure that out.
Okay. Well,
Basically, if we select for them, Mark, does it kind of give them the space and the time to for frontal lobe and executive function to develop? I mean, do you see that as a
yeah,
strategy?
absolutely. I would say in my consulting with parents, the most challenging age group is 18 and 19. And it's
Hmm.
because I would never advise someone to put a 19-year-old in their own apartment. Maybe if they were a college student and they were together with other college students, okay, that's kind of a known thing. But it's the hardest age, and things like gap years, things that have some structure to them, are enormously helpful because they do still need support. With kids that age, if they're not going to do a gap year, I I say to parents, look, you got to let them live at home, but I recommend that they set down a kind of um, non-negotiable, and then hope that in fact it's non-negotiable. And the non-negotiable is if you're going to live here with us, since you've stopped being a student, since you either decided not to go or you were put on academic probation, you have, like it or not, become a member of the adult world. And our bottom line for that is you must be doing something constructive, right? You put it as an abstract principle. That could be any of a number of things. Could be getting a job, could be taking classes at the community college. It could be a real commitment to volunteer work. It could be a gap year, or it could be anything else you can think of. But you have to be doing something constructive. Now, granted, the kid can always play the trump card of passivity, which is none of the above, right?
Hmm.
Now we're playing chess. Now it becomes much trickier. But I completely agree early with your comment that you have to allow for the fact that they're developmentally often just not ready. They're just not ready. Kids who aren't, I often counsel parents when I'm seeing their 12th grader and he's starting to do a bit of a 12th grade collapse, which in a bright, successful student to me is a red flag. He's saying, I'm not ready to be out of high school. And I have endlessly coached parents to do gap years for those kids. For several decades, I got almost no takers because it was kind of a black mark to do a gap year. Now it's become much more accepted. People are seeing the value of it. The idea of graduating from college at age 23 or 4 versus age 21 or 2, it's no longer a stigma. So, I mean, you're definitely on target. That's the approach for kids in that age group.
For people who, hear the term failure to launch, sometimes there's a negative connotation with it. What does it really mean for you, the term failure to launch? What does it not mean? I'm curious to hear, because
Yeah,
I've heard people use it the wrong way.
yeah. Well, let me say first of all, that was not my title for the book. Right?
It's an
My
editor's
my
issue.
my
What was your
first
title?
my first title was Getting a Life,
I like
as
that.
I
as in
like
I
that.
do
like
like that.
in the concept of a life structure,
Yeah.
like Levinson spoke about, and the I've done a lot of publishing at sort of academic level. I'd never worked in the big leagues before, and these were people from Random House, and they said, "Well, some people will get that and some won't." So then I said, "Well, my backup title is Stalled, Stuck, and Scared." And they said, "Yeah, at the office, we've started to call it Failure to Launch." And
Interesting.
I've to this day never seen the movie, but I know there was a movie. And I just said to myself, well, they're the pros. They know what they're doing. I
Yeah.
still, when parents, like the last chapter of the book is a letter to the kid. It's titled Dear 20 something. And parents, this has happened to me 4 dozen times. I get an email from someone saying, we'd like to give that letter to our son or daughter, but we don't want them to see the title of the book. And so, of course, I have a PDF that I send them where nowhere does it mention failure to launch. It is pejorative, right? The fact that it's failure is
Yeah.
it's just not a it's a terrible way to introduce a topic. It's more often than not it's either anxiety driven, like I am not ready for this thing called adulthood, which seems kind of mysterious and complex, and I suspect I'd be in way over my head. I'm not ready for that. So I have to divert in some way. Or the other thing I see a lot, and you guys probably do too, is I really am not able to do that now. I am functionally disabled because of my drug use, my clinical depression, my manic psychotic episode, my, something, there is an impairment that needs to be addressed before we're going to do the kinds of things that I'm discussing in my book, which are they sort of rest on the assumptions that this child is capable. They're not performing, but they're capable. But there are a lot of kids that functionally are really not capable at this point.
And Mark, back to your point at the beginning, this has been an issue around for years. It's just 30, 40 years ago, a lot of students who had these challenges, it seems like they would end up in apprenticeships where they're working for a plumber or electrician or in one of the trades. Is that fair? I mean, it's been around a long time.
It has, and I think there is some interest and sentiment kind of nationally and politically for renewing that and reinforcing it. It absolutely, when some young person asks me, well, how much do psychologists make? My answer is usually, well, about as much as a good electrician.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very completely viable life. And yes, there should be more of that. And I push more and more parents. I think for kids, the kids that I'm seeing are usually from um, middle to upper strata educational backgrounds, and I think they have trouble with that. That
Yes.
they see it as somehow I'm giving up on something.
And similar military, right? I mean, in a similar way, the military has an option.
Absolutely, and for some kids, the military is absolutely perfect. It's just
Yeah.
so perfect.
Yes.
I have
Yeah.
a client, an adult client. His stepson went off to college, um, was doing terrific first semester, so he said, until his grades come out, and he had a 0.5 grade point. Second semester, the exact same thing. So he went into the Air Force. He is now doing the kind of work he's not allowed to talk to his family about, because he is guiding drones and various military hardware, and has developed a skill set that will just, he'll he'll step into a job making more than I do, I'm sure. But it's just perfect for some kids.
Yeah.
Well, this has been absolutely amazing. And I know we have 1,000 more questions, but what is one thing that you want to leave with our listeners?
Oh my goodness.
It's hard to
It
whittle
could
it
be two or
down.
three.
Okay, two or
Yeah.
three.
You do 10. Yeah.
Yeah, I think of there's a story I end the book with, and it's a story I heard on NPR, and as much as I tried to dig it out so I could reference it, I couldn't. But here's the story. It's a mom is being interviewed. She lives in New York City, and her 27-year-old daughter is a heroin addict. And the mother has devoted the last 10 years of her life trying to address her daughter's heroin use, has had her in and out of treatment, in and out of treatment. It's been an absolute parental nightmare, right? And so the mother at some point makes a decision for herself. She approaches her daughter and says, I'm not going to bug you anymore about your use or treatment. What I want is for us to meet for breakfast Sunday morning, maybe twice a month, and just catch up. And all I ask is that you come straight. And so they do. And they talk, I don't know what, girl talk, fashion, sports, politics, I don't know, but they just meet on the grounds that of where they can share a connection. And the interviewer at the very end says, I have this question. I'm very reluctant to ask it, but here I go. What's your daughter doing now? And the mom says, and I have equal reluctance to answer the question because she has just recently put herself in treatment for the very first time. And so I think my point is stay connected. Stay connected. I had a dad I worked with whose son was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, very uncooperative with treatment, lived in Cleveland, bouncing between different homeless shelters. And what the dad would do is he had him tracked on his cell phone. And once a month, he'd go to wherever he was staying and he would give him a carton of cigarettes because his son would accept that and accept it graciously and with appreciation. It's like you find whatever that is to remain connected to your kid. The kids, if that kid is in my office in therapy and he can give me evidence that his parents love him, I'll often say, do your parents love you? And, oh, of course. Well, how do you know? Well, if they can answer that question, well, because, my dad and I go fly fishing together, or my mom and I we watch this series, that we both love. There's something that speaks of a spark of connection. I know that kid has hope.
Okay, Mark, where can our families find your book and learn more about what you're doing if they want to know more about this?
Well, the book is available on Amazon, and I would like to say all bookstores, but I've checked many of them that don't cover it. But certainly it's available on Amazon. I have a website, which is just my name, lowercase, markmcconvillephd.com. And that I think there's a link there where you can purchase the book, and you can do some snooping on my background if you need to check me out.
That's amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate all of your wisdom. And thank you to our listeners. Keep parenting for the present.